right, before we get started, I want to review a couple of housekeeping items. All of your lines are muted, so please use either the chat feature or the questions feature on your control panel if you have any questions throughout the presentation. The presentation is going to be about 40 minutes followed by a Q&A session, so feel free to ask any questions throughout and we'll save those till the end. You will also notice at the top of your control panel on the left-hand side there's a button with double arrows. That will actually collapse your control panel so you can view the presentation in full screen. We are also recording this event, and the recording will be made available to you all after we are done. So today we have Rick Letcher presenting today A Tale of Two Teams, Measuring Productivity Based on a Traditional versus Agile Approach. The webcast will contrast the project management styles of two XP Agile teams and the consequences of the PM's behavior and attitudes. One team will triumph with effective use of metrics, and the other will end in tragedy. Richard Letcher is a Chief Process Architect and Lean Agile Practice Director for CC PACE. He has worked with organizations of all sizes, transforming their standard practices into high-performing Lean Agile processes. He is a certified Scrum practitioner, a project management professional, and a Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. He is the author of advanced Lean Agile project management courses and has lectured on IT Master's programs. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Rick.
Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome, and thank you, Leanne, for the kind introduction, and also to Version 1 for setting up these webinar series. There's been a number of very interesting webinars that I have listened into, and I find it quite valuable, and I thank you for allowing me to put my 2 cents in on this subject also. The topic of today is going to be the Tale of Two Cities, and this is measuring productivity based on a traditional versus an agile approach. We're going to be using two teams to contrast the difference in how a project manager behaved under previous versions of the PMBOK and under newer versions of the PMBOK, and see how by using productivity measurements we can improve our ability to succeed. A little bit about CC PACE. We've been in the business now for about 28 years. We offer services from software development in the Lean Agile perspective, as well as consulting services and training. The slide that I have up here is something that just recently I was greeted to when I went to an SAP systems and portal implementation team that I've been working with, and on the door they pasted this up there, and I was quite curious about why they did it. I think we all can take a pretty good guess at it. They felt that once they committed to the Lean Agile approach, you really cannot go back, and that is a key concept for all of them, that the light goes on and now there's no reason to perform work in the previous ways. Okay, so let's jump right into the presentation here, the Tale of Two Teams. This is about two product development teams. I worked with them for well over a year each. They work side by side, and because we'll be talking about two different teams, to make it easier for us all to keep track of what's going on, I've arbitrarily named one team the Eagle team and one team the Ant team. They each had a project manager. Actually, there were several project managers, but there were two key ones, one dominant on each of the two teams. And both of them have very large, real problems that they had to deal with. And the project manager's behavior and their attitudes impacted the ability of the XP Agile teams to actually perform and be successful. One does end in a tragedy, and one does end in triumph. The Eagle team, their big problem was that there's a government mandate that changed the rules. And it was a significant rule change that impacted the full spectrum of the application that they were supporting. And failure to meet those deadlines would risk incurring penalties for the clients that were using the application. So it was a must-do. It had to be done. The team was only given 8 weeks to deliver. Some critical facts about this team was that the Eagle team, its product was really soaring. It was an outstanding product. It was a leader in their industry. However, the product was a bit buggy, and the releases were not consistent. Some functionality really didn't work. The product architect recently had left the company, and the team was perceived in general to be lacking in discipline. The project manager had a specific belief, and this is perhaps the way most project managers are led to believe. I am a project management professional, PMP, and I certainly have strong beliefs in being a leader. He was quite firm with this. He believed that work was best performed when it was led by a confident and a decisive leader, and that teams perform their best when someone has high expectations of them and there is a sense of urgency. This is also known as the Parkinson's Law. So his behavior was somewhat predictable. He was very decisive, very task-oriented. He had a plan, and he was going to work the plan. He was action-oriented. He would make decisions quickly. He was quite passionate, very judgmental. There was a command and control personality, and he was by the book. Project manager jumped right in, took action when the government mandate came about. He took command and researched what the rule change was, and then he worked with the client representatives and the R&D delivery management to determine what was the best approach. They created a very detailed scope statement, requirements list, a complete solution, and a full task list, and then they came up with a timeline. And then they called the all-hands kickoff meeting and brought the team together. At the kickoff meeting, the project manager was quite clear. The team was informed that the plan had been approved, that the scope was fixed, all the requirements were must-haves, the dates were firm, the approach and the deliverables are not negotiable. The Agile team, being Agilists though, quickly pointed out that there are a lot of questions that they have, and they wish that they were involved earlier in the decision-making process. However, they weren't. But in any case, they asked a lot of questions, and they insisted on creating a backlog of stories that would equal the scope of this particular project. It was all of 8 weeks long in the eyes of the project manager. They sized the stories, and they estimated the development alone was going to be 16 weeks. The 16 weeks was unacceptable. The scope and the deadline were firm. Don't you understand that? It was perhaps the way he expressed it to us all. So we need to get this done. There's nothing we can do about it. The team accepted the mandate. They requested some additional resources. They tried to find other ways to mitigate their circumstance. They broke up the workload into 8 chunks, one for each week. So they began to work in a 1-week sprint. They began work immediately on their first batch. The impact and the consequence of the way this all came to be was that they attempted to complete the work in the weekly quota that they had, and they were unable to do so. Each week they fell further behind. Errors started to creep in, and the mistakes started to multiply. A key developer was reprimanded for their buggy code, and he quit. The deadline was missed, the project was judged a failure, and the senior vice president requested the customary project review. The review was led, though, by the ANT team's project manager, and he had just gone through his own big problem, which led him to learning a whole new set of project management tools. Using these new tools, it helped him uncover some very surprising results about the Eagle team's real issues. Let's shift over to the ANT team. Their big problem was that corporate, having heavily subsidized the ANT team for the past 6 years, had decided that the product line was really not profitable and began searching for alternative solutions. One of the decisions that they made is that they laid off 2/3 of the team. The remaining 1/3 of the team was asked to focus on just maintenance work. Now that actually didn't hold very long. Very shortly afterwards, several projects were given to the team. They were also told, though, that if there is some way that you could find a way to do measurably more, then they could reconsider their decision to perhaps sell off the product line. Some critical facts about the ANT team was that the ANT team product was a commodity that corporate was looking at just to maintain parity with their competitors. So they underfunded this team for 6 years. This led to massive backlog of bug fixes and small enhancements and technical debt. But the team knew each other for quite a long time. They've been working together for well over 8 years. And the project manager that worked with this team had just finished studying for his PMI PMP under the PMBOK 3rd edition. And under this 3rd edition of the PMBOK, project managers not only to be concerned about the triple constraints, but also about product management and process management. So he had a different perspective. So this project manager believed that work was best performed when it was empirically demonstrated. Teams perform their best when empowered to be self-organized, self-managed, to be adaptive. He felt that his role was to shepherd work requests through the process. He didn't see himself as a domain expert or a task master. So his behaviors were different. He was collaborative, he was process-oriented, he was result-oriented, very realistic, very reflective. He kind of saw himself as a border collie. Let's keep this team together, let's keep him focused on the work at hand. He was quite pragmatic. The project manager's actions were first and foremost was, oh, well, I need to know just how effective and how efficient the process is. And that's the first question he asked, and he went out looking for that. And he realized that he focused on looking for waste and ceremony and complexity within the process, that he'd be able to speed his team up. His goal, his hidden goal, his agenda, was to find a way to prove that this team could be more productive. He studied the retrospects and the stand-ups. He used root cause analysis, that's the Ishikawa diagram and the 5 whys. He used Pareto curves to determine the vital few. He used run charts to see the team productivity improvements. He used a combined set of metrics that proved that he could use to prove to corporate that the team indeed has been able to more than double their productivity. The project manager shifted his role from being a classic leader in the terms of the original versions of the PMBOK towards that being of a lean thinker. In the lean thinker, he started to shift to think of himself as more of a process owner and not a person task manager. He worked to find out what was the actual portions of the process that created customer value. He managed based off of quantitative data. He looked to keep value creation flowing. He continually looked to remove waste and ceremony complexity. He balanced the workload, removed the stresses, and improved the quality. The impact and the consequence of the ANT team was that he uncovered 5 root issues within scope planning, task planning, requirements management, sprint demos, and test-driven development. The team applied minor improvement processes, and they identified within 4 iterations improvements that equated to 150% improvement in the team throughput and over 108% improvement in the pair development productivity. The corporate stopped looking for an alternative solution. They now realize that the team can be productive. It was not the people issue that they thought they had, but was actually indeed a process problem. The team exists today. Some key findings. On the ANT team, there are 4 key findings. First off, Agile did work, and Agile alone was not enough, and that subtle changes have very big impacts. It is not enough, and it's not all about being Agile. How did Agile work? Well, everyone involved, everybody who was either a chicken or a pig, they felt that the team was certainly more productive and would give witness. They would say so, and anybody would ask, well, how productive do you think they are? Well, I think they're about twice as productive. However, there was no hard evidence, no facts, no data. And the project manager went to the senior leadership and said, I think Agile's going to fail. That this team, using Agile alone, is not going to be able to demonstrate to senior management that they are more productive, and that they run the risk in another 4 or 5 months when management asks them once again, can you prove to me that you're better, that they would lack that evidence, and therefore they would be shelved or sold off. So Agile is not enough. Agile does not provide quantitative data. In recent webinars I've listened into, I've heard this several times, and it's a strong belief on myself, because every single team, every single Agile team that I've come to, their form of measurements are not valid for the purpose of understanding productivity. So we hear that velocity is not a good measurement of productivity. That is true in the way in which the Agile teams that I've witnessed are actually implementing the concept of a velocity chart or story pointing. However, Agile really is an implementation of lean thinking, and lean thinking, specifically Lean Six Sigma, says that every process can be measured. Now, some processes are easier to measure than others. However, you can measure a process. Both of these teams were called product development. They created a product. Now, how is it and why is it that we cannot measure the product or the productivity that's coming from each of these two teams? Lean thinkers say you can. There will be variance, there will be variations, but you need to find a way to come up with reasonable measurements. Subtle changes can, in fact, have very big impacts. There is a lean premise that our processes over time can accumulate a significant amount of waste and ceremony and complexity. Lean thinking uncovers the waste. It improves the flow of the process and delivers more product in less time. That is the beliefs of lean thinkers. Now, cognitive processes are considered world-class if they can be about 35% efficient. Some can reach greater than 50% efficiency. IT solution delivery teams' processes are considered cognitive processes and typically are found to be untouched to be less than 10% efficient. That means prior to any Agile improvements, IT solution delivery processes are typically less than 10% efficient. In fact, those that I have studied, more often than not, are less than 5% efficient, and some have been less than 2% efficient. Recently, a large financial organization, one of their leaders had mentioned in a conference that their particular process, when it was went through its lean program, it was found that its process cycle efficiency was at 3.4%. 3.4% efficient. Well, consider this. If you happen to be at 10% efficiency today, and you go through a process of leaning it out and reaching 35% efficiency, well, that would be a 2.5 time improvement. 2.5 time improvement. So that means you could create 2.5 times more product within the same time. You can be 2.5 times faster in delivering your product and service at the same time. Now consider that organization that was at 3.4%. That's where they started. What would they need to do in order to double their productivity? They would need to get to 6.8%. That's all they would need to do. How difficult is that? It's not difficult at all. Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about the Eagle team and their significant findings. There were 4 significant findings there: that people versus process, the big, hairy, upfront design versus emerging design, Parkinson's law, and then sustainable and extraordinary effort. People versus process. The project manager, unaware of lean thinking, went to the quality assurance manager and asked them for his findings on the number of defects found in systems integration test, user acceptance test, and later into production, and found that for the Eagle team that there was a significant amount of defects that were being introduced into these various controlled environments. And he went one step further and said, can you tell me who owns that code? He said, well, actually in the Mercury Interactive test director, we do have the ability to show who's actually repairing the code. And so the project manager went through a series of validations and assessed which who was the actual person correcting the code, making the code. And that's how they determined that one particular person had a higher level of defects than all the rest. Well, it turned out that that's actually not really what happened. And the project manager was using the metric in an inappropriate way. And he felt that the specific developer was actually creating buggy code. Well, actually, no, he wasn't creating buggy code. He happened to be one of the team's best developers, and he was merely trying to save the project under the extraordinary circumstances they found themselves in. So in order to help each of his friends out, and because he stayed late, he would quickly go out and check out their code, find fixes, apply a fix, and then check it back in. Now, no one knew that he was doing this, and so the metrics that were being captured were skewed to imply that it was his code that had all the bug fixes in it. If the project manager was aware of Lean Six Sigma premises, that he would know that he should not be using a metric for anything other than its stated purpose. And this was a significant mistake because one of the best developers actually ended up quitting. This caused the whole project to fail because it was a significant person to have been left from the team. Another key finding that the ANT project manager had when he studied the Eagle team was that the project manager up front, thinking that the team did not have a strong architect, chose not to include the team members in the decision on how to approach solving the problem. So up front, prior to coming to the team, he worked with a couple of isolated people to come up with a general approach, and they locked down that approach in the statement of work. So when he came to the team was told, this is the approach. The team was unable to influence them, even though several times throughout the process they pointed out that there was a simpler, easier way to get this done. Later, they eventually fell back to that approach. In any case, the big, hairy, upfront design failed. If they had allowed the team to participate in a collaborative way, they would have come up with an emerging design that would have worked and would have been able to complete the work on time. The next significant finding for the Eagle team was Parkinson's Law. While a team was only given 8 weeks to develop the solution, they actually had a total time of 9 months. The project manager had withheld from the team 2 contingency months at the end because he felt the team wasn't going to deliver, so he's going to hold back a little bit of time. He also held back some time for doing heavy testing. He also chose not to engage the team up front for 5 months. So the project manager, not being aware of a concept of lean thinkers called the customer cycle time and process cycle time, and not be aware of the Agile notion of collaborative emerging design, actually caused the failure for the team. 9 months would have been more than enough time for this team to actually deliver on this particular solution. The final significant finding on the Eagle team that the project manager found was that the team tried their best to work at an extraordinary rate. Using a velocity chart, we could see that the team was promising to deliver far more than they could. So there were two lines on that particular chart. It's called the promise versus delivered chart, and it showed what was the planned number of story points per iteration and what was the actual. In the early stages of the project, the first several iterations, we could see a significant gap. Because the team was not allowed to use yesterday's weather to pull back the numbers, they continued to overpromise and underdeliver. That collapsed to the point where they delivered nothing in one iteration. Soon afterwards, the team said, enough is enough. We will only promise what we can actually do. And the team shifted from an extraordinary pace to a sustainable pace. And the charts demonstrated this. Now, the fascinating thing here is that we now have a record of the difference between a team working at an extraordinary pace and a sustainable pace. And by having this record, we're able to also prove over time that a team can indeed work at an extraordinary pace when necessary. Usually about the third or fourth iteration, though, significant failure starts to occur. We can see the defect count go up, and we can see the actual delivery of productivity going down. So we now have a rule in place that if indeed a project manager needs to come to the team and say, look guys, we have a circumstance that's unique and we need to put in some overtime, and I'm going to ask you to work some late evenings and on the weekend. However, we know from experience now that we can only ask you to do this no more than 2 iterations in a row before we have to stop and allow you to go back to your sustainable pace, because the introduction of failure is too significant. Okay, so classic project management. Ellie Goldratt in the book The Goal, a terrific book, tells us that how you measure me is how I will behave. And one take on this is, well, then don't measure. And a lot of Agilists that I work with often tell me that. Rick, you can't measure people. If you measure people, then they're going to behave based off of your measurements, and that'll have a negative impact. They're going to start to game the system. And there is truth to that, and gaming the numbers is also valid, and that has shown up, and we've had to find ways to correct that. But the interesting thing is that if indeed you do come up with measurements that create the correct behavior, then indeed you will influence them to demonstrate the correct behavior. So the trick is picking the correct measurements and using them wisely. Under the traditional classic project management, the focus has been on the triple constraints. There's a limited view of trying to measure progress and status. It's also using the concept of a single data point. So it's not uncommon for a project manager to ask, what is the earned value, or the scheduled performance index, the CPI, the CV, the estimate to complete. All of these are single data points. Lean thinkers, however, are instructed not to work on a single data point, always to work on a trend. So it's important to use run charts where along the horizontal axis is some unit of time. You can have a unit of time that's equal to your sprint. You can aggregate that to a rhythm of a month or of a quarter based on how much data you have. But the key point here, though, is that you cannot make any decisions based off even the trend data unless you have a minimum of 6 data points. Therefore, 6 iterations would be the least amount of data that you can have on a chart before you can start using the chart for making management decisions. Typically, a project manager who is focused on the triple constraints would use tools such as a Gantt chart, resource leveling, status reports, phase gate reviews, and change control. If we were to shift over, though, to the tools that are used by a lean thinking Agilist who believes in the PMBOK, the PMI, Book of Knowledge, then with that shift, under the current release, the 4th edition, as well as under the 3rd edition, we're expected to not only be concerned about the triple constraints, but also to not use that as our focus. We should also, in addition to knowing about the triple constraints and measuring progress and status, we should also be concerned about process management and productivity. So in addition to what we have learned as project managers on the triple constraints, we're asked to understand what is our velocity, our throughput, our capacity, our efficiency. We should know our customer satisfaction. We should know what our quality metrics are. We should use the metrics specifically for what they're used for. Our tool set's somewhat different. Now we're going to use the quality analysis toolkits, the Ishikawa fishbone diagram, 5 whys, Pareto curves, run charts. There are a number of run charts that I favor and use. I have a delivery rate chart. I have a code complete chart. I have a promise versus delivery chart. I have an efficiency chart. I keep that in my back pocket because I have no interest in going down the path with anyone that may be misled to think that I'm measuring work effort. All these measurements are measuring process and productivity, not work effort. That's left to the project manager who wishes to focus on the triple constraints. Finally, I'd like to share with you the actual charts, metrics that I propose when I come into any shop. I look to see productivity, efficiency, customer satisfaction, and quality metrics. Any one of these can be stratified, broken up into a number of different ways. So teams that are distributed across the country, across the world, you can come up with metrics and you can compare. And why not? If you're a business manager and you have $2 million in a compelling business problem, wouldn't you like to be able to say, Rick, how long is it going to take for you to do this? Sally, how long is it going to take you to do it? Do you have any evidence to show me of your productivity, your efficiency, your ability to give me good estimates? I can give those all to my management. Now, if they have a compelling argument and $2 million, don't they have the right to know that information? I believe they do. And this has been one of my problems when I come into a shop and they say, look, we've tapped into Agile, we really like it, but we have no proof, we have no evidence. And we're getting a new COO in a couple of weeks, and we know the first question is going to come out of his mouth is, why are you doing such risky things as extreme programming? Why are you doing that? Do you have any evidence to show me that you're actually better off? Yes. Yes, we do. Why? Because we're lean thinkers. We're following a process that requires our metrics to be accurate, to be repeatable and reproducible. Notice that at the very bottom here it says that these metrics are carefully selected, there are only a vital few, and there's a low collection burden, and they're only used for their stated purpose. So back to my existing team, they tell me that you can't leave. Now that they've known what lean thinking does for them and Agile does for them, they can't go back. They're committed. And I'd like to go ahead and open it up to questions now, and I'll be interested to hear your thoughts.
Excellent presentation, Rick. Thank you so much. Yes, please use the question feature on the control panel to ask questions. One of the questions we have is how is team productivity of world-class measured? Is 3% efficiency of what?
Well, it's an excellent question. It really boils it down to the key point here that we as Agilists have been keeping story points. However, as we keep story points, we're not really certain that there's any way to measure that. And if you put a classic list of story points per iteration across the board, I witnessed one team that had been working for over 2 years. Their velocity chart, as they called it, with a 2-week rhythm over 2 years, showed a very choppy series of data points. It was clear that there was no movement in the chart. If indeed they were lean thinking, that chart should have shown over the 2 years that the team's productivity had increased, but it didn't. It showed a flat line with a very high variation. How high was the variation? It was 1/3 plus or minus the norm. 1/3 plus or minus the norm. So clearly their chart was not a measurement of velocity and did not represent the fact the team had grown and gotten better and better and better. Over the course of 2 years, you would expect a team to not double, but go 4, 5, maybe even 6 times the original productivity. Yet the chart wasn't showing that, and that was because they were unable to use they weren't unable to define a metric that was valid. All metrics in lean thinking need to go through a measurement systems analysis, an MSA. An MSA determines whether or not the measurement is valid and usable for business decisions. Quite often what you use is a kappa. Kappa is a way in which you can verify the results. This was the dilemma that I came to with the ANT team, that they had been using story points, and we were pretty convinced that they were accurate. But when we put them through the MSA, it turned out that they were not only not reproducible, but they also not even repeatable. And we were kind of confused by that, and we realized that we had to make some changes, some improvements to the process. But we couldn't quite nail down why it wasn't working correctly. So we started studying the team, and by doing the R&R gauge, we recognized that one team member was, in fact, able to reproduce the results, that she was accurately giving us the same measurement for the story pointing of certain stories over and over again. And the rest of the team wasn't. So we started to study the team, and the team was using two approaches. They were using Fibonacci, and they were using planning poker. And as we did our analysis of both of those processes, we realized both of them are very poor predictors of productivity. Neither one of them was valid. So we had to back away from that and comprise a new way in which we estimate at work. And we also recognized one of the reasons why. When that particular developer was in the room, the estimates across the board were pretty accurate. And we found that when she was not in the room, the estimates lost any sort of consistency. And then we started to study them, and while they're doing planning poker, very carefully, very subtly, we recognized that others were waiting for her to make a call on what it was going to be, so 1, 2, 4, 8, or 16. And as she drew her card, the other members drew it slightly slower than her. So we then began to realize that they were gaming the system. We had to put in place a process to stop that, and one of the things that we did was to retire both Fibonacci and planning poker. The Kappa demonstrated this to us quite clearly, and we realized that the key reason the underlying reason why the metrics were so poor coming from the team was that our team was so diverse. On the team, there were members who had very specific skill sets, but they didn't have the end-to-end skill set. Only this one person who happened to be a tech leader who had been with the team for 8 years was she able to consistently give the estimates accurately. Others were specialists in the UI, business logic, data logic, and back-end legacies. And when we asked them to estimate as a team using planning poker, they were guessing what was done because they lacked the ability to understand how to estimate the work across the full end-to-end portions of it. So we changed our approach.
Very good. We have quite a few questions, so hopefully we can get a few more. Can you please distinguish between team speed and team capacity?
Sure. Capacity is the ability, is the pipeline that the team actually performs in. Studying teams, we found that if a team has a story point of a velocity of, let's say, 25, that in studying that team, their pipeline, their actual capacity is really 3 times the size of that. And we were confused about that and why the numbers were so significantly different. But we were able to recognize that a team, their story pointing was based off of the work in which we asked them to focus on, but indeed they actually had a lot of other things that they were doing. They were answering questions for other purposes, and they were leaving the room to help on production outages and so on, and there was a significant gap between their actual velocity, their ability to deliver, and what was their actual capacity for the full shop. I'm not sure if I answered that question again correctly, though.
We do have some more around process efficiency. What specifically do you use to measure process efficiency? How do you identify and measure downtime, idle time, and scrap?
Those are good questions. Process efficiency, I use Ideal Developer Days. Now, Ideal Developer Days is not what many people might think it is. It is not directly, you cannot take Ideal Developer Days and extrapolate work effort. It doesn't do that. And the reason why is because we asked the team we believe very strongly in pair development. However, it turns out in many shops, pair development really is 3 or 4 developers as well as 2 or 3 other team members. In any case, they work as a team. We ask them if they were left alone as a team, ideally, how long would it take? And this is one of the improvements we had to put in place. Is the team originally was telling us 1, 2, or 3 ideal developer days, and we found that our burn down charts were flatlining. It wasn't until we asked them to break the task down a little further, so the largest task was ideal developer day of 1, then we found that our charts were no longer choppy and actually usable. So they had a quarter, half, 1 as their metrics for ideal developer day, and ideal developer day was for those people necessary to get this task done. Ideally, how long will it take? Quarter, half, 1 is the answer. They'd have to come out. It didn't matter if there was 1 or 5 people working on that task. We wanted to know for that one task, ideally, if they were left alone, is it a quarter, half, 1? And that's how we measured. So downtime, you can see in a chart, a trend will show up and down. An example right now is I'm working with this SAP team. They're all, a good portion of them are going to go to ASUG, and they're going to, some are presenting and some are just attending. So there's going to be a significant capacity constraint placed on the team during that 1 week. The team has chosen to work on a 2-week rhythm, and for 4 days out of the 10 days, there is going to be a capacity constraint. So during sprint planning, this is recognized and it's calculated. So yesterday's weather is adjusted because of this capacity constraint of X number of players not going to be in the room. We want that to show up in the charts. Another approach would be, well, let's just skip that week. Let's just say that that team doesn't do any work at all during that week. Well, no, that's not what we want to do. We want to have a chart over the course of the 26 sprints of a year that shows where the downtime is. We want to see that. It's an assignable cause. We would like to know why there was a dip around the holidays, why there was a dip around August when people take vacation. We want to see that and recognize that and plan for that. And that is one of the things that we look for. Scrapping is another key indicator we'd like to have. It's not one that we spend much time on, but if a story is pulled after some work has been performed on it, that's scrap. Okay? We would like to know that because we'd like to know what is the requirement volatility. If I have a scope of 100 story points and the team has a capacity, a rhythm of 25 story points per iteration, I can calculate how many sprints we need. And I would also like to know how many stories had to be withdrawn because they were vague or because they required a spike that was significantly larger than was necessary. These things are telling me that we have insufficient requirements or quality of requirements, and that's a defective input into the team. If you fix that, then the team will work at a higher capacity, and you'll be able to see it. So it's good to measure that.
Excellent. Next question. Is it possible to implement Agile within isolated disciplines using Agile methods within development, but not including requirements gathering or management?
Not requiring gathering.
So being able to take Agile methods just within development, but not using it within requirements gathering and management. Can you break up Agile?
Can you break it up? Oh, tough question. Ideally, well, first off, there's a strong belief on my part that requirements are an input to a team. Not all teams believe that. So if I'm in a team that has, Rick, our scope statement is all of 1 sentence long, and we would like to start sprint 0, where we do our release or product planning activity, and all we got is a 1 sentence long scope statement. Can we do that? Absolutely. Therefore, all requirements and all analysis, all gathering, all analysis, and all activities necessary for us to get our hands around the requirements are part of the team. Okay, we're all agreed with that? Yes. That works in the room? Yes. Are we going to measure it? Yes. It's all within the room. Now, in the SAP implementation, you'll find that there is a very strong resistance to that because they believe that blueprinting, which is an upfront phase that's usually done by the business community, needs to be done. And during blueprinting, they need to understand what is it that the business process looks like, how would we implement it based on the capabilities of SAP, and what is the impact on the organizational structure in our architecture. And they would typically want to write business requirements up in blueprinting. We shift them to writing stories. So they come into the room with their first pass. I believe there's about 7 passes that stories go through. They evolve from a one-line item to the level of detail necessary for a quality delivery. They come into the room to tell this story for the first time to the team. They already have gone through a minimum of 2 passes on their stories. So they have come to us with a backlog, with a narrative, with acceptance criteria, and they have an opinion of what they think their scope is, their requirements. The team immediately, because they're in Sprint 0, will validate that scope, meaning that they'll validate the stories. And it turns out about 20% additional stories are added during the validation process.
Okay, very good. Next question. I've witnessed velocity sometimes is viewed as a negative metric. Knowing that velocity can fluctuate from iteration to iteration, how can you address that?
Variation exists in all processes, and that's a good thing. You want to see that. There's variation that's in control, and there's variation that's out of control. It's the variation that is out of control that I want to find the assignable cause to. So I'm perfectly okay with the fact that over the course of time, the team has a variation as long as it's in control. So I mentioned a team earlier that had been working together for 2 years. I knew that they were not 1, 2, or 3 times better than they were when they first started, yet their chart didn't show it. And that was because their metric wasn't a valid metric. And what their chart was showing, a variation of a plus or minus 1/3 of their count, is totally unacceptable. That metric is not valid. Now, if the variation is within control, it's not as large of a variation plus or minus, then I'm perfectly okay with that variation. There's no reason for me to be upset about that. There are a number of reasons for variation to exist. Now, if I was in a manufacturing environment, I would want to have a very, very minimal variation. In a cognitive process like IT, where you have to think and be creative and have backflows, then it's perfectly okay to have variation. The question is how much? And that's what the team needs to accept. How do you accept that? Well, you're using the lean thinking principles. You will come up with what is the appropriate amount of variation. And when it goes past a certain amount, then you say, you know, there's something going on here that we need to check it out. It's worth doing some studies on this. And that's when you're going to do some root cause analysis, perhaps a Kaizen, maybe just a quick improvement, to slightly tweak the system and remove that type of variation.
Okay. Next question. What is the best way to ensure that you're on a good design path, given that design evolves over each iteration?
Emerging design is one of the things that is counterintuitive. It's a conundrum for many. I have the same anxiety at times. I'm going, oh my goodness, what in the heck are we brewing up now? Only to find that as a team continually adjusts, adapts, they get better and better and better at it. Now, is there rework involved? Yes. Quite often they're going to say, you know what, we had some pretty cool ideas in the past 3 or 4 iterations, but you know what, we really missed something big here. What's the impact? Well, we're going to have to go back and rewrite a significant portion. The impact might be at foundational levels, and it could be quite significant. If you have the right people involved, and if you have a systems architectural plan, a vision that you started with, and as you introduce new work requests to the team's backlog, and as they go through that Sprint 0 activity, they validate the impact on that architectural view, then they're going to head off most of the major faux pas. There will still be times that we'll be doing rework, and I'm okay with that. It has never been so devastating that we wish we didn't do it this way.
Okay. One quick question. Some people are wondering if they could get PDUs for today's session.
I don't see why not. The content of this is based off of my advanced Lean Agile Project Management course that we offer at CC Pace, and the PDUs for that exist. And it is approximately equal to 1 hour, so that's what a PDU would be for this.
Excellent. We also have quite a few people asking about either books that they can read or links or websites you could send them for some more of the information that you talked about.
Since we're combining 3 camps, three disciplines here. So if you want to learn more about PMI and the Project Management Institute, then the PMI.org website is the place to go. I would strongly recommend you believe in those disciplines. It is no longer the triple constraints, and if you study hard for your certification there, you will indeed have a much better understanding of how to take advantage of not just project management concepts, but also lean concepts as well as Agile. Agile is huge. There are wonderful books out there, tremendously interesting books. Where I find my time most taken up and most interested in is on the lean side of it, because lean comes from the business management perspective. We're in a business to create a product or service that a customer is willing to buy. If there is no customer willing to buy our product or service, then there's no reason for me to exist in my job. I believe that's the world that we live in. Therefore, lean is the most important. And understanding lean, without question, there are a number of great books out there. Certainly Mary Poppendieck's books are good. They don't tell you necessarily how. However, I haven't read her new book, and I understand she's got a new class coming out too. There might be some interesting things there. The George Group came up with Lean Six Sigma. They're the creators of it. So if you can get your hands on any of the George Group books, that's a great place to start. And the Lean Thinking book by Jim Womack, excellent read. Excellent read. And I mentioned in the presentation Ellie Goldratt. Some people call it a love story. I'm not quite sure why. But it's an interesting read, and it really explains from a manufacturing perspective the concepts of the theory of constraints, how to think lean. I would strongly recommend reading that.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We are pretty much at our time, and I'd rather end a couple minutes earlier than a couple minutes late, and wanted to turn it back over to you, Rick, if you have any final words.
Just then, thank you for the opportunity, Leanne and Version 1 for putting this together. I find that these webinars are really fascinating. We're getting some tremendously good information sharing going on among the community. And I applaud both you and Version 1 for putting the effort in and making this happen. I look forward to seeing and hearing more of the webinars, and if there's anyone who has any questions that they would like to ask me personally, no worries. You can get a hold of me at rlacher, that's R-L-A-C-H-E-R, at ccpace.com. Please go out and see our website, and you can see about our training classes and the services that we offer.
Thank you.